We got another reaction by the man Echoes. 13 students walk straight into a death trap. Let's check it out.
This footage shows a group of teenagers clinging to a slick canyon wall, only to be violently swept away just minutes later, one after another. And while these scenes are from a movie, the story behind them is all too real, and is, in fact, a chilling reenactment of what actually happened in 2008. To this day, that tragic April afternoon is remembered as the worst outdoor disaster in New Zealand's modern history, one that claimed several young lives far too soon. Watch until the end to find out what led to this shocking tragedy and why, even more than a decade later, those who miraculously made it out alive still avoid going into the water alone. But as always, viewer discretion is advised.
Hey, before we get into the shit, hey, get your pencils, get your books out, take some notes. You'll never know when your life is on the line. You'll need to know this shit.
On the morning of April 15th, 2008, 10 students from the Year 12 class were getting ready for what all of them considered the most anticipated trip of their school life. Elam Christian College, where the teenagers studied, regularly offered various outdoor trips as part of the official education curriculum, fully organized in partnership with the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuits Center. Therefore, this wasn't their first adventure. Every year, students took part in hikes, beach days, summer camps, and team-building exercises, each designed to teach leadership, resilience, teamwork, and how to stay calm in challenging environments. Still, this time, the trip felt different, as the group was about to head on a far more remote journey, deep into Tongariro National Park, for a canyoning expedition through the Mangatapopo Gorge. The class had been divided into small groups of 10, each scheduled to depart on different days. One of those groups, the very first to volunteer, included 5 girls: Ashley Smith, Sarah Brooks, Natasha Bray, Portia McPhail, and Tara Gregory, and 5 boys: Kish Proctor, Peter Shee, Anthony Mulder, Floyd Fernandez, and Juan Shu. All of them were 16-year-old creative students who loved pushing themselves beyond their limits. So even though parts of the journey were expected to be physically demanding, the entire group welcomed the challenge, including Juan, who had cerebral palsy, but still didn't want to miss this long-awaited adventure.
What does that mean?
After all, they were just 1 year away from graduating, and the group had already spent years as part of the same close-knit school community, where they didn't just study together, but also performed at assemblies, went on church trips, volunteered, and built friendships that felt more like family. And furthermore, joining them was someone the group deeply respected, their 29-year-old teacher and mentor, Tony McLean, known for his calm leadership and deep understanding of teenagers' needs. For many of the students, Tony wasn't just a supervisor, but someone they trusted completely. So by 9:15 a.m., with everyone accounted for and final checks complete, the bus pulled out from the Elam Christian College parking lot in Auckland and headed south toward Tongariro and the adventure they had all been looking forward to. After several hours on the road, the Elam students finally arrived at Tongariro National Park and settled into the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuits Center. Inside the main lodge, instructors were already preparing gear for the teenagers, sorting harnesses, wetsuits, and safety equipment for the upcoming canyoning trip, which was scheduled for early afternoon. Leading the group from OPC that day was 23-year-old Jody Sullivan, a newly certified outdoor instructor who had completed a 12-week outdoor educator course just a few months earlier. And although she had mostly served as a trainee or assistant during previous trips, she had some prior experience in canyon environments, including Mangatapopo Gorge itself. So, without hesitation, the group set off from the center. Around 12:30 p.m., they followed a gravel path that wound through low brush and volcanic boulders until they reached the narrow mouth of the Mangatapopo stream. And by that time, a light rain had begun to fall, but the group remained determined to carry on with the long-awaited trip. So, Jody, together with Tony McLean, helped the students into their wetsuits, flotation vests, and helmets, performed basic safety checks and a briefing, and eventually, they finally entered the gorge. While the Mangatapopo stream itself stretches for around 15 kilometers, their goal was to navigate just 200 to 300 meters of concentrated canyon. The first section was relatively easy to manage, with only ankle-deep water and scattered boulders along the way. So, the group moved slowly but steadily, using each other for balance as they climbed over mossy rocks and splashed through narrow corridors where the stream narrowed into small pools. But less than an hour into the gorge, they faced their first real challenge, a deep, swirling basin that forced everyone to swim across in strict single file.
Damn.
Some students hesitated, unsure of their footing or the water's depth, Wan Shu struggled the most, but Tony McLean always stayed by his side while Jody helped guide the others across. So, despite the difficulties, the group remained in good spirits, moving upstream carefully. However, with every step, the sound of rushing water was growing louder. Yet the group continued on, and by around 2:40 p.m., they reached a natural rock ledge on the left bank of the canyon. It was narrow but dry, and Jody decided it was a good place to stop, rest, and reassess the route. But by that point, the rain hadn't just continued, it had actually picked up. The gorge itself was a classic alpine slot canyon with steep vertical walls on both sides, often just a few meters apart.
I feel like if I was in one of these rivers and it would shoot me down, like, bro, I feel like, I don't know, maybe I'm delusional, but I feel like I could, like, get to the edge, at least grab onto a rock, like, stay somewhere safe until it dies down, but I don't know, maybe I'm delusional, let me know.
In dry conditions, water moved gently between smooth boulders and calm pools, but the geography made it uniquely dangerous during storms. Since when heavy rainfalls hits the upper catchments of Mount Tongiero, the water flows directly into the Mangatapopo stream. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened this time. Suddenly, the ledge began to shrink, and water started creeping over even the once dry patch where the group had stopped.
Damn.
The sound of rushing water now echoed through the canyon like thunder, and the stream that had barely reached their knees just moments ago had become a deep, frothing torrent. Even the color of the stream itself had changed, from clear to dark and cloudy. Therefore, panic began to spread among the group, since as the water kept rising, the students were no longer just battling the current, but also fighting the cold. And while the wetsuits offered some protection, the water was alpine chilled, with dangerously low temperatures ranging from 4 degrees Celsius to 8 degrees Celsius. It was clear they couldn't stay in that spot much longer, with the ledge rapidly disappearing beneath them and hypothermia becoming a very real threat. Jody Sullivan now faced the critical decision, what the group should do next. So she scanned the gorge, and only one viable option came to mind, to cross to the opposite side. Since the narrow slot they had entered through now looked impossible to retreat from, with the rising water showing no sign of slowing down. Jody explained her plan. She would swim across first to reach the far side, secure a rope, and then guide the teenagers one by one, while the teacher stayed behind to help support each student as they crossed. The group watched in silence as she stepped back, braced herself, and leapt into the raging stream. For a moment, she vanished beneath the surface. Then, slowly but surely, Jody emerged, kicking through the current until she reached a large boulder on the opposite side.
She made it?
There, she secured the rope and gave the signal to begin the crossing. The first students to go were those in better physical shape, just to help catch the others on the far bank, and Ashley Smith was among them. Encouraged by the group, she gripped the rope tightly and moved quickly, with her eyes locked on Jody's outstretched arms. And when she finally reached the other side, the group let out a collective sigh of relief. Next came Peter. He took a deep breath, jumped in, and managed to catch the rope halfway through. The current almost dragged him sideways, but Jody grabbed the boy just in time and helped him out of the water.
Jody.
But with each passing minute, the current grew stronger, and the remaining students began to panic. Still, their teacher did everything he could to calm his students, offering steady encouragement and reminding them of the warm showers waiting back at camp. Meanwhile, it was Kish Proctor's turn. He launched from the ledge, reached the rope, but suddenly missed, so the water ripped him away in seconds.
How'd he miss?
Immediately after, Sarah Brooks slipped on the ledge and was also swept away before she could even grab the rope. For a long, breathless moment, no one said a word until a faint cry echoed downstream. Miraculously, both Kish and Sarah had survived, carried over the spillway and battered by the current, but somehow managing to resurface, bruised and bleeding, yet alive.
But they were good?
For those still waiting, the conditions were only getting worse. The group was now standing in waist-deep water, and there was absolutely no time to hesitate. But when Portia McPhail, Tara Gregory, and Natasha Bray attempted their crossings, the current had become even more violent. Eventually, none of the girls reached the rope in time, and they were brutally swept away, one after another. At the same time, Floyd Fernandez and Anthony Mulder attempted to cross together, but the current hit them hard, and, unfortunately, they were also pulled under and violently carried downstream. At that point, only two remained on the far ledge, teacher Tony McLean and Wan Shu. Without hesitation, Tony decided to tie himself to Wan with a short rope, knowing the boy, with his poor physical condition, couldn't make the crossing alone.
I don't know if that's a smart
So the two of
decision.
them stepped off the ledge, and for a moment it looked like they might make it. Tony managed to grab the rope, but only for a split second. The current yanked him backward and twisted both of them midstream before pulling.
I don't know about this decision, tying yourself to someone. That just doesn't sound like a recipe for success. Like, I mean, if you're gonna go down the river or whatever, but like, I think your best chance would just be by yourself, tying yourself together. Like,
pulling them under and out of sight.
That was a bad
Meanwhile,
idea.
on the opposite bank, Jody Sullivan was desperately trying to reach OPC by radio. At 4:05 p.m., one distress call finally went through. The center immediately alerted police, 5 services, and local rescue personnel, who arrived at the site within 25 minutes.
Damn, 25?
Rescuers began evacuating those who had made it safely to the opposite bank, the instructor herself, along with Ashley Smith and Peter Shee. The other 2 survivors, Kish Proctor and Sarah Brooks, had managed to reach the shoreline on their own after being swept through the spillway.
Okay.
At that point, only one terrifying question was left. What had happened to the 6 missing students and their teacher? A massive search was launched across the area surrounding Mangatapopo Gorge. And at around 10 p.m., after 4 grueling hours, the first tragic discoveries were made. The lifeless body of 5 students were found near the main channel of the Mangatapopo stream, downstream of the spillway.
I don't get, like, I know that the thing picked up, the water picked up a little bit, but like, how did the first people make it, but these people didn't? Like,
all victims of drowning. But Tony
They
and Juan
drowned?
were still missing.
damn.
So the search pressed on, continuing deep into the night. And then, at approximately 2 a.m. on April 16th, nearly 2.5 kilometers downstream from the
Damn.
original crossing site, they were finally found, still tied to each other, and tragically, both lifeless. By the following morning, the students who had miraculously survived were already back in Auckland. Meanwhile, news of the tragedy spread rapidly across the entire country, and with it came a multitude of questions. How could a school-sanctioned outdoor trip end with 6 teenagers and their teacher dead? And slowly, the answers began to surface. It turned
Honestly, bro, I don't know how to feel about the person that was like escorting them. Like, at the same time, like, they're supposed to know what they're doing and like decide whether it's safe to go or not. But at the same time, it's like, bro, she's gonna get all the blame. Like, I don't know how to feel about the person that was like
out that at 6:45 a.m. on the morning of the trip, a weather fax had arrived at the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center. It included warnings from Met Service about incoming rain and reduced visibility across the region. But since no official thunderstorm alert had been issued, the center saw no reason to postpone the trip. After all, OPC had always operated under a clear policy. Unless formally advised otherwise, programs would continue, rain or shine. The explanation also lay in staffing, or rather, the lack of it. Although the canyoning trip had received one of the highest possible risk scores under OPC's own internal flash rating system, 16 out of 17, Jody was the only instructor assigned to lead the group that day. A rating this alarmingly high should have triggered additional precautions, including a second trained guide. But none were eventually sent, largely due to high staff turnover at the center and an ongoing shortage of qualified instructors. And perhaps even more disturbing, this wasn't the first time danger had struck this very location. Back in 1977, a shockingly similar fatal accident had occurred in the same gorge. During a routine outdoor trip, an OPC instructor had positioned himself in the stream to help participants cross. It had been raining, and as the water began to rise, he was swept away by the current and eventually drowned.
Damn.
That tragedy marked the first recorded fatality in OPC's history. But decades later, when the 2008 group entered the same canyon, almost no one working at the center even knew it had ever happened. An overwhelming level of neglect, not to mention the absence of an emergency evacuation plan, the malfunctioned radios, or even the bigger question of how a teenager with cerebral palsy ended up on a trip of such extreme difficulty. And
What does
so,
that mean?
in the weeks that followed, the pressure only continued to mount. Families of the victims demanded answers, and a full investigation was launched. One that concluded the Sir Edmund Hillary Outdoor Pursuit Center had failed to take all responsible steps to ensure the safety of both its employees and the students under its care. Eventually, OPC formally accepted responsibility and pleaded guilty to 2 violations under New Zealand's Health and Safety and Employment Act. The court ordered the organization to pay nearly $500,000 New Zealand dollars, including $60,000 to each of the bereaved families.
Bro,
5,000.
honestly, I feel like even that much, bro. Like these families lost their what? They were all 16, and then the teacher, bro. Like that is nothing. Like no one wants like to take that money, bro. You want your fucking family there.
To each
That
surviving
ain't
student
shit.
and an additional 40,000 in fines to the state. But of course, no amount of money could bring back the lives that were lost
Yo, that's what I
or
just said.
ease the pain carried by the families left behind. And although no formal charges were ever brought against the instructor, some of the victims' families felt that Jody Sullivan should have faced more than just public scrutiny, that simply attending funerals and sending condolences wasn't enough, especially given that not long after the tragedy, she quietly left the country to take a job abroad. At the same time, Tony McLean's parents, Jeanette and John, buried their son with full honors. They described him as someone who would have fought for those kids, someone who would have done everything in his power to protect them, and they were completely right. Since even Portia McPhail's mother told Tony's family that she found peace knowing her daughter had spent her final moments with him. In the end, Tony McLean was posthumously awarded the New Zealand Bravery Star, an honor given to those who show exceptional courage in life-threatening situations. The tragedy left its mark on everyone, even those who had been lucky to survive. A decade later, on the 10th anniversary of the disaster, Ashley Smith shared the lasting effects of what she'd lived through. In an interview with the Weekend Herald, she sadly said, "Ever since it happened, I avoid going to the beach alone. I can't deal with open water. I feel terrified if I'm by myself, and the first thing I ask is, have I gone too far out? Will I be okay?" She eventually gave up her dream job and carried a weight of survivor's guilt that never fully faded. Kish Proctor, another survivor, also admitted he still felt uneasy around water, even years later, saying, "You always have that uncertainty in you. You are overcritical of things." Kish also sadly added that he had once loved swimming, but in the years that followed, he could count on one hand the number of times he'd been back in the water. Every year, schools all over the world send students on camps, hikes, and outdoor adventures, believing that challenges like this build character and that nature offers something no classroom ever could. And most of the time, they're right. But sometimes, when planning is rushed, warnings are ignored, and basic safety protocols aren't followed, those lessons come at a price no one should ever have to pay. Now let me ask you, have you ever been on a school trip that still gives you chills when you think about it? And after hearing this story, would you still go? Let me know in the comments. And
Hey, that's gonna do it. Hey, shout the man Echoes. Hey, this shit, water's dangerous, man. Be careful in water. Wear your floaties. You are never too old to wear some floaties. Never think you're too cool to wear them either. Hey, RIP all the people that died in this. With that being said, though, we is out of here.